Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. Today we're going to be speaking about Dennis Noble's views on genetic determinism. Again, this is a catch up to his discussion with Richard Dawkins, which is really something a lot of people, I think, don't understand the gravity of the situation. They don't understand how important this actual discussion was. They don't understand the long term implications of this discussion from a sociological perspective, how it's going to affect society over a long period of time, and from an academic perspective, this was a watershed moment. This was a milestone. This was a landmark. This was a point of inflection. Assalamu alaikum, Ahsam, one of the first people there. And it's always lovely to see you all. So, as always, I'm going to be, not as always, it's something I've started to do recently. I'm going to be, answering your questions live as you ask them, and also sharing the video with Dennis Noble. So, firstly, let's get a bit of warm up here. Which part of the world are you calling in from? Are you commenting from, rather? Walaikum salam. Thank you. Bangladesh. Nice. I've never been Bangladesh. I would love to go Bangladesh. I have where I'd love to go. I'd love to go Dhaka, because obviously Dhaka is like it's amazing, right? It's such a huge city. It's like the London of that of that part of Asia, right? It's a huge city. My friend is from Sylhet, and he's shown me some really beautiful imagery. Like Sylhet just looks really, really nice. Chittagong, the people look oriental. It'd be nice. And I love eating spicy food. So, in fact, the first Dawa organization I worked in before IERA, my manager was from Bangladesh, and he made really nice Bengali curry. I loved it. It was so beautiful. So yeah, yes, you told me you'd come contact Dr. Rifan Ahmed. Yeah, if I come, I'll definitely contact Rifan. It'd be great to see him. Okay, I'm from Chittagong. Okay, nice, nice. That's brilliant. Brother, please make another video showing your books and your home library. It's not actually my home library. I use the Sapiens library here, and I don't keep many books at home. But I mean, there's a lot of books. I think at some point I need to start going over certain books that I'm reading. Oh, there was something. So I was going through this book yesterday, Darwinism and the Divine, and this is by Alistair McGrath. Alistair McGrath is a fabulous thinker, Christian thinker. He's a thinker from um, Oxford University. Maybe he's retired now, but a brilliant thinker, former atheist who believes in God, and he speaks about God. And yeah, brilliant person. So Darwinism and the divine, and there's some really interesting things in here. So he speaks about natural theology, going into Paley's sort of argument, then what the Darwinian narrative is, the change in natural theology, and then it goes all the way into prospects for natural theology. This is deep stuff. So because I want to start doing some reviews of some books, I would love it if somebody also buys this book, or as many people as possible, and we go through it together. That would be absolutely wonderful. All right. Okay. Alrighty, let's get this party started. Bismillah. We are going to be watching, as you guys can tell, there's going to be some story about, not story, it's going to be a, okay. Now, guys, when I play this video, you guys need to let me know whether, oops, where have I gone? Oops, there I am. Yeah, so when I play this, you guys need to let me know if, you know, if you can actually hear what's going on. I think that's important. That's one of those things that I keep having issues with, whether people can actually hear the video. So as soon as I start playing, please let me know if you can hear it. Say yes if you can hear it.
You've used the metaphor in the past of thinking of genes not as a code, as you said, but as a kind of musical score.
Yes.
And as a score that can be interpreted in various different ways. Can you tell us a little bit more about the way you think about this?
Yes. Well, I am, as it happens, a musician. I actually give a big concert tomorrow in Oxford in the Sheldonian Theatre. But no, I've obviously taken from my musical side of my life this metaphor for a very good reason. If you look at a score of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, whatever you want to take, and you look at different orchestras and different soloists interpreting those scores, what stands out a mile to a musician is the differences.
Okay, so just for a bit of context, what he's going to do is he's going to be speaking about his understanding of biology using an analogy to an orchestra, and how you have various different parts that holistically play a tune, which he calls the tune of life. So systems biology, you know, is aptly captured in his book, The Music of Life. It's a very, and he's a musician as well. So it goes to show sometimes what you do in your personal life also affects, you know, the way that you actually think. But that's the analogy that he's actually giving. And one of the things which I do like to do, I like to play a video and then you know, comment on it and start, you know, discussing it. However, because I don't want to get a copyright strike, and I am playing something from the Institute of Art and Ideas, I have to regularly stop and give a few comments there and then, rather than waiting till the end, because you can't play a video for too long. So I'm just gonna just keep that in mind as I interrupt, or as I stop playing and I speak.
Of course, you can recognize the same notes are there, but the interpretation is so different that one has always to say there's this style of playing Beethoven, there's that style of playing Beethoven. The same thing can be said about Bach. And I think the answer is that the analogy is that with the same notes, you can play totally different music. And the same is true for genes. With the same genes, you can play very different behavior. For example, if I'm selfish, I have my selfish characteristic at a time when I have the genes that Dennis Noble has. When I am altruistic and very kind to people, I have exactly the same genes. My genes haven't changed between being selfish one day and being altruistic the next day.
Okay, that's a really good example, right? That's a really good example. So just to repeat, the genetic material within your body is the same when you exhibit a behavior which is the polar opposite of what you exhibited earlier. You could be extremely loving and caring and kind and empathetic, or you could come across as really strong and aggressive and, you know, driven and passionate and, cutthroat and capitalistic and not empathetic at all. But you still have the same genetic material. So genetic determinism is the idea that genes are destiny, that the genetic makeup that you have, when it interacts with the environment, it leads to behavior. That is clearly not true. That is something which we have known for a very long time, but of course, the likes of Richard Dawkins will outright refuse to, accept this. So think of it. I mean, I've been referring to David Stove quite a bit. I'm sure you guys know that. David Stove was a philosopher of science, atheist, big critic of Darwinism. He wrote a book called Darwinian Fairy Tales, sadly committed suicide before the book was published. And, if he was alive today, he would love, this would be music to his ears, what Dennis Noble is saying. David Stove would be so happy that a credible, eminent biologist, and remember, physiologists are biologists, despite what these new atheists are going to try and say, is challenging the gene-centered perspective head-on, using its very ideas and, understanding them from a thorough perspective. And remember, Stove wasn't a biologist. He was a philosopher. So his critique of the selfish gene perspective of neo-Darwinism was essentially from a purely philosophical perspective. What we find from Noble is he's challenging it from an empirical perspective. That's a relevant difference. That's an extremely important point. That's not something which is subtle. That is in your face. And I think people don't realize the importance of the things that he's saying and the seismic shift that actually is taking place within biological sciences because of Noble's interaction with Dawkins.
I naturally use the same genes. So genes can't be responsible for my selfishness. I'm responsible for my selfishness.
So what is the agency here? Where do we locate it? Who's doing the interpreting of the musical score here?
Okay, so agency. Remember Descartes' old idea of the matter and the spiritual sort of mind, or dualism. So Cartesian dualism is essentially the idea that there's two elements. There's the physical makeup and processes, and then there's the agency. And the agency, the spirit, the soul, whatever you want to call it, the consciousness, for some people, that is going to be your level of indeterminacy. That is going to be your level of agency. That's going to be free will. So that's the way Descartes would do it. And Noble believes that Dawkins, and obviously Noble doesn't believe in Cartesian dualism. Cartesian dualism is something that obviously theists believe in. From what I could see about Noble, he's not religious. He doesn't say whether he believes in God. He doesn't say whether he doesn't believe in God. My understanding is he's an agnostic, or he's just indifferent, agnostic perhaps, maybe even atheist. I don't know. But he doesn't bring religion into it. He's looking at it purely from an empirical perspective. So it's clear that he believes in monism. He believes the mind, or what we would believe to be the soul or consciousness, is the brain at work. It's no more than I wouldn't say no more than the brain at work, but it is essentially all one. So his perspective is that Dawkins is reviving the old Cartesian dualistic narrative by having the replicator, which is the selfish genes, and the vehicle, the body. And he wants to challenge that, but at the same time, he doesn't want to believe in determinism. He wants there to be a level of indeterminacy. So that's the subtle sort of point that he's going to make now. And it's very interesting some of the thoughts that he has on this.
The organism is the source of the interpretation. Now, the big question there is, how do you explain that without recreating a duality? How do you get to that without having to make Descartes' mistake? Descartes' mistake was to suppose there's a kind of other entity, non-material, a soul, a spirit, whatever you want to call it, that interacts with the mechanics, as it were, because he actually thought that other animals, apart from humans, were indeed mechanisms. So now, interestingly, most evolutionary biologists who are the neo-Darwinian persuasion tend to say, well, humans are also. Now, that's difficult because we seem to feel that we're not. But put that to one side. The big question is, how can you get creativity without having to have something up there that injects it into you? You know that lovely painting of the fingers pointing, you see, and Adam gets, as it were, activated by the finger of God. We don't need that. I'm not saying whether people who believe that are right or wrong. I'm leaving that to them. But what I do think is you don't need that because the organism has that ability already. The reason is simply because it can use the chance events that occur in its molecular mechanisms. There's where the creativity comes from.
All right. There's some heavy things that he's saying here, right? So amongst human beings, you have people who spend all day hunting and gathering and trying to increase clearly in their reproductive success. You have other people like Einstein, other people like Charles Darwin, other people like Aristotle, other people, you could even say Ghazali, people who are dealing with higher level questions. And I said Ghazali because one of the things I was very proud of is when I was doing, I believe it was the first year at Birkbeck, we had an American professor, and that American professor was mentioning, great skeptic philosophers in history. And he mentioned like 5-6 names. So obviously Descartes, and maybe he mentioned Kant. However, amongst those 5-6 great skeptics in history, he mentioned Ghazali. So, we would see Imam Ghazali as a Imam of the heart, from the perspective of his spiritual teachings. That's what he's really known for. However, he is in his own right a philosopher. And it doesn't matter if he, people always get into his attack on the philosophers, but that was not just an attack on philosophy. That was him attacking a particular viewpoints held by certain philosophers. It wasn't as clear cut as he's just against all of philosophy and this stupid stuff. But anyway, I'm losing track because whenever these things come up, I link them to other points which I think are important, because I do think there's strong Islamic tradition of philosophy which shouldn't be lost. But what he's basically referring to is, how do you get creativity, right? How do you get that? How do you get the Ghazalis? How do you get the Einsteins? How do you get these guys? So it can't simply be genetic determinism. There has to be a level of, there has to be some stochastic mechanism which is leaving to that, which is allowing that indeterminacy, which is allowing that freedom. And here, obviously, he's referring to the genome. He's referring to copying errors, breaking errors, and the organism using those for elasticity or plasticity to, the organism is almost acting like the agent. That's what he's basically saying. So he doesn't like the distinction between, the vehicle and the replicator as a neat distinction. And this is one of the things that he, brings up in the debate with Dawkins, which is really, really phenomenal. It's a beautiful debate. If you haven't seen it already, I'm going to play some more because I think this is some really juicy stuff.
Then the question is, what emerges from that you want to keep and what you want to reject? It's very simple.
It sounds like what you're saying is allowing for a kind of freedom to enter into the picture of how we think of our biology. Genetic determinism makes it sound like we are Cartesian machines
Exactly,
and we
yes.
have a clockwork
Exactly
and we kind
so.
of work. But my question is there now a room for determinism to come from another side, namely the environment?
Okay, so the questioner here from the Institute of Art and Ideas, I just a side point. When we have sometimes these great thinkers and they come on these podcasts, they come on these, these platforms, sometimes the interviewer is not really that smart, and you could tell by the questions that they're asking. But these questions are really well thought out. So essentially, what Noble is trying to do is trying to explain the selfish gene perspective, gene determinism is wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. It doesn't make sense. However, he's allowing, he's not just challenging a view. He's acknowledging it is partially true, but not sufficiently true. And this is something he mentioned in the debate. However, he goes into where does the indeterminacy come from? Where does the creativity come from? Where's the elasticity, plasticity, whatever it is, come from? So it comes from that stochastic process, the mechanism which the organism uses of copying errors, and the mechanism. And I think I mentioned this last time, or I may not have mentioned it, but the organism can choose. It can choose to stop that. It could choose the level of those copying errors, and it can allow those. It can use those changes for its own end. So, what the questioner is asking now is a brilliant question, which is, doesn't the environment dictate it? If it's the genetic makeup, and if the environment is allowing switches to go on and off, if the environment is doing that, then in a way, aren't we back to square one? Aren't we genetically determined? But this time the environment is playing that role. So watch his answer.
Acting upon us.
Yes, but now let's have a look at that, because you see, that's stochastic as well. I agree with you. Yes, you could say that the environment is itself determining what we do. Now, I think that's partly true. Clearly, I've become...
Okay, now I just want to highlight something. Now, this is something I love about Dennis Noble. He will give points where they're granted. So he will say, I accept partially what you're saying is true, but it's not sufficiently true. It's not enough. It's, it's that nuance that he accepts. So, for example, when it comes to natural selection, the debate with Dawkins, he's ready to say, well, I see your point, Richard, here, but this is where the limits are. I think when we are in debates, in discussions with our opponents, with our with people who have strong views against us, one of the things that we happen to do is we disagree on points that they're making that we don't need to disagree on. And we don't allow ourselves to acknowledge that they've made a point, and they've made a point which is partially relevant. That is extremely important. That is academic integrity. That is something which, in fact, doesn't embolden the opponent. It shows the opponent, well, partially it sort of emboldens them, but it shows them, look, I understand your point, but you do realize that your point doesn't extend to the solution that, the implication that you're pointing out. That's often lost. And I really love the way that he always acknowledges where his opponents are correct.
The kind of person I've become through my history. So in that sense, it must be the case that the environment is a big influence, just as genes are. You see, I don't deny that genes are influential.
Okay, nobody is saying genes are not influential. And you heard it there from Dennis Noble. Sometimes what happens is Noble's coming up with his ideas, right? He's coming up with his ideas saying we shouldn't make the primary level of analysis the gene. We shouldn't make the gene-centered perspective the main perspective, because we should get rid of this reductive understanding. We should start focusing on holism. And then somebody comes along and says, well, Mr. Noble, thank you for your lecture and your books and what you're saying. However, look at these scientific studies that show that this genetic makeup has a huge impact on your body, on your temperament, on this, on that. Well, he's not denying that. No one's denying that. The point is, he's saying genes play a role, environment plays a role, the organism plays a role. There are different levels of analysis, and those different levels of analysis interact with each other. Those different levels of analysis work together in a holistic way. That's what he's basically saying. He's not knocking the idea that there is truth to the argument that genes are causally effective, but are they the primary cause of human morphology and behavior? No. And that's what he's basically saying.
They just simply say they're not causal in the way that we can be as agents. They're not causing my selfishness. They're not causing other forms of my behavior. Now, the way I think to think about this is that once you can harness chance, use it, you have the possibility of creating novelty. And that...
Okay, guys, listen. Memory, remember this point. Memory is in the elbow. Okay, this is what one of my teachers taught me. Memory is in the elbow. This is Muhammad Arshad. Someone taught it to him. What is he saying? Right? I want you, like, this is some Amazon delivery, but just use a pen and write. Okay, I'm gonna write this as well. Memorize this. Remember, these are important points, very important points. Chance facilitates creativity. Chance facilitates creativity. Keep that in your mind. That is such a, it's the mother of the point. That's what he's doing, right? He's making a very sophisticated point in a subtle way, right? But we have to understand the implications, what he's saying. It's nothing less than revolutionary. So I'm going to go back and rewind a little bit so we don't miss out again on what he's saying.
Chance, use it, you have the possibility of creating novelty, and that's what we're doing. And isn't that what we call creativity? You see, before a Beethoven emerges, we couldn't have predicted. I don't think musicians before Beethoven would have predicted what he did. He turned the apple cart around and came in with bum, 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 and all the rest of it, and turned music upside down. And Einstein did the same with physics, fundamental physics. I think what those people were doing was to find the chance processes within themselves, seeing it, and then saying, oh, I want to go that way. That's going to shock the world.
Right. Just think about what he's saying there. The organism facilitates the direction of evolution, not genetics alone. There is a level of interaction between the organism and its own genome, and it's that molecular mechanism of chance, using that for creativity. Think about that, because if you have been thoroughly indoctrinated in the church of Darwinism, if you are a graduate of molecular biology, whatever, you're a researcher with 30 years of experience, what he's saying is so novel and different to what you've been indoctrinated in. What he's saying is the exact opposite of what you've been told. I mean, consider something. In fact, just go back to even these discussions that I used to have in the Park Speakers Corner a few years ago, discussions about sociology, right? So why do human beings have behavior X when behavior X is not conducive to survival and reproduction? What did you used to hear? People always try and justify any behavior using some sort of, adaptive advantage. And Noble is not saying that. He's saying the exact opposite. He's saying creativity is due to the molecular stochastic process, and that indeterminacy allows creativity and allows chance to be used by the organism. This is mind-blowing stuff, guys. This is nothing short of mind-blowing. And this is why Noble and his noble thoughts is having such a huge impact. I mean, look, guys, I just want to say this, right? The war in Ukraine, I think that's a good analogy. Everybody knows about it. The reason why we know about it is because right now it's being studied as a landmark geopolitical moment. It's where borders are shifting straight off. They haven't shifted since World War II in that part of the world. New countries are being carved out. All this stuff is happening. So whether somebody from an international relations perspective believes in realism, constructivism, liberalism, whatever it is, they're all like hawks trying to understand what the heck is going on. This is some madness, right? We all know about the war in Ukraine because it's such a watershed moment. It's such a point of inflection, a landmark, right? Event, a milestone. When it comes to what happened between Noble and Dawkins, that is more significant than this war in Ukraine. From a biological perspective, from a perspective of understanding of biology, what they're saying is a seismic shift in biological, in evolutionary sciences. This is something which, how many people are going to see this video? Let me just click on the video and just see it, right? So this video, and this is 250,000 people. Okay, that's not too bad. The debate is being seen by maybe close to 1 million people, 1.5 million. 1.5 million. But compare that to all of the news coverage of the Ukraine war. Yet this is way more important. This is about our creation. This is about our makeup. This is about, us. It's not about something related to just a group of people in one part of the world. This seismic shift cannot be underestimated, which is why I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm actually just not going to stop talking about Noble and Dawkins, and I'm going to keep doing this until I am satisfied that this topic has been sufficiently covered, because this is very close to my heart, and I really want everybody to understand the implications of what's going on, because I feel it's like a huge shift and a huge paradigm change, and most people don't know what's going on, and that's sad. That is really sad, and that's something I want to change in my humble way that I can.
And they go for it. Now, sometimes they're wrong. That's fine too. That's how science, music, poetry, and so on experiments and finds its way forward. If we didn't have people who were wrong, we wouldn't be where we are. So we have to encourage that. But the process, I think, is within ourselves. And it's based on the fact that we are not determinate like computers with silicon chips that are rigid. I sometimes think of it like this. If I met a robot that looked very much like a beautiful girl, and everything went fine together with her and me, but then I discovered there was a big problem. I couldn't work out why she doesn't seem to know where she's going. What's her purpose? It's as though she's being programmed by Google to be the best person to satisfy all my wishes. But if that is all that it does, the robot, it gets boring after about 6 months, you see. And then I asked the question.
Okay, so although he's talking about it being boring, right, and he's going to get into why it's wrong, the selfish gene perspective, the perspective of the central dogma, right, the subscribers to the Wiseman barrier, all of these people together, the neo-Darwinian apparatus was a science stopper. It's something which did not allow the holistic understanding of biology, the systems biology understanding that Noble is speaking about, to be followed. It led many scientists and researchers down a very rigid way of thinking, which did not help the progress of science. Now, ironically, it's supposed to be the religious folk. It's supposed to be the religious folk that, have been science stoppers and been hindrances to science. And here they're referring to, Christian Europe, which is questionable because there were a lot of Christian scientists, right? But definitely not true in the Muslim world. But here it's the Darwinists, right? It's the subscribers to neo-Darwinism and the modern synthesis who were, telling the world, this is it. You have the Wiseman barrier, you have the central dogma, you have the selfish gene perspective. W.D. Hamilton's views became, spread throughout. And this affected everything. It affected evolutionary psychology. It affected the way that molecular geneticists worked. It affected the way that research was done. And this is why from Noble speaks about, he's not just speaking from a scientific perspective, but also from a non-epistemic health and wealth perspective, right? And that's why he's also espousing his ideas.
But how does the robot see it? Could we imagine how the robot would see it? And I think what the robot would say would be roughly this. Oh dear, I'm made of silicon chips. My molecules, yes, they vibrate a bit, but they don't move around. He's made of water. What happens in water? The molecules are moving around all the time. It's Brownian motion, which we've known about ever since about 1830. So she's frustrated. I wrote a story like this. That's why I can repeat it here, because it fascinates me, because this will come. AI will get to the point where we will be able to create simulations of us. Well, ABBA have just done that in their magnificent performance 40 odd years later. So we will get to the stage where we can recreate this kind of almost human activity. How would we know there's a difference? And I think it would be illustrated quite well with the story I'm telling you, which is that the poor girl in the story would be saying, look, this is terrible. I know I cannot harness chance in the way he does. You see, the reason I can produce all kinds of variations is that my creator built a random number generator inside me so that I don't always do the same thing. But that isn't the same as him, because he's got a purpose. That's the difference.
Wow. That's a beautiful example that he gave of the stochastic difference between us and, say, a robot. And, even a random number generator has limitations. But when it comes to us, the sky's the limit. Or you could say even the sky's not the limit. There is essentially so much plasticity and elasticity. And look, think about it. Think about the implications of what he's saying for something like evolutionary psychology, right? Just think about it. Think about the fact that evolutionary psychologists cannot fathom this idea that the genes don't play this role in terms of human behavior, because that's what the entire evolutionary psychology enterprise is based upon. Okay, so now I really hope you guys enjoyed that live stream. I certainly did. It was great fun. I love Noble. Noble's a noble person. And I look forward to doing more of these streams, inshallah, breaking down Noble's perspective. I also wanted to speak about Quranly. Now, Quranly is a Quran habit building app. It's something I use, something I love, something I've pushed out. Please make sure you download and you start using it as well. It is literally something which is going to change your life, inshallah. We spend so much time on our phones, zombie scrolling, screwing up the reward system. This is the problem, brothers and sisters. Just want to ask you a question. Let's see this in the comment section, right? I want to ask you a question. Would you trust somebody that decided to drink alcohol before they gave a maths exam, before they drove a car, before they had a serious conversation, before they went to court and they represented you in the court of law? Would you do that? No. Why? Alcohol releases a massive amount of dopamine and it screws up your reward system by flooding it with dopamine. And then the next time you need to do a task which isn't that important, not that important, it doesn't lead to that much dopamine. What happens is you cannot focus and you can't do that properly. What happens when you are scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling? You're screwing up your dopamine reward system. You're screwing it all up, just like those people who drink alcohol. And that's why other tasks which are important you can't do. The Quranly app will help you to build a habit of checking and reading the Quran. Now, I say this to everybody: 3 verses a day in a language you understand. That's it. That's all you need to do. 3 verses a day. Now you may think, oh, that's nothing, that takes 10 seconds. Well, try it. Try and do it every single day. Try and give yourself a target just of 3 verses every single day. And that's something which you will see, it will habit stacking. It'll help you build up more and more habits. Jazakallah khair for watching this live stream. I really enjoyed it. What time is it now? Yeah, I think it's time to end. May Allah reward all of you. Let me know your thoughts about this live stream, and please continue your support of, through comments and commentary, and just generally being very supportive, because even recently one of the subscribers, they commented on a video I didn't know about, and that's one of the videos I'm going to be watching inshallah soon. So until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi